Every successful person got there by going through tough times. Success is a hard-ass teacher who likes to knock you around along that journey. You know, it takes real guts to not give up and keep going. We'll hear stories about failures and how these leaders flip the script to create success. I'm John Schultz. Join me and let's discover how success is never really overnight. Welcome to the John Schultz podcast. We have an incredible guest. So excited for this podcast. It's been a long time coming. We have my friend, partner, Ed Russo from Russo Development Company, a prominent figure in New Jersey real estate in the tri-state area. So glad to have you. Thank you very much, Ed. We appreciate you being on the show. All right, so I'm just going to give a little about it. I mean, it would take me a long time to run through the whole thing. It's so funny. Like once I have a guest on, and even though I know them well, and I actually research them, and I'm like, oh my god, like I didn't realize a lot of this stuff, and I get to know my friends better this way. So it's great. But a little bit about Ed. Born and raised in Jersey, so he's a Jersey guy, which I love. You know, I guess you've been around real estate your entire life, but you joined the firm at age 24. I got into real estate the same time frame as well. You know, young, hungry, and not sure what we want, but you sort of chose that route. You became COO of Russo Development January 1st, 2001, which I can't believe we're in 25. I mean, time flies. And just some stats here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but since that time, under your leadership, you built over 7 million square feet of commercial space, 60 plus projects, and delivered almost 5,400 residential units and data centers and all sorts of unbelievable product in our state, making it a better place. Even though that sounds cliche, you actually are. So again, thanks for being here, and I'm excited to do this. So the way I start off, this is about the myth of overnight success, and it's amazing with all the podcasts that I've done to date that you know going all the way back to when someone is younger, a lot of these traits are instilled when we're young, and we don't even realize by habit how they carry through our life, and certain things happen that we don't realize that we have to get through. So my first question, I love this question because it brings you back there, is so how would your father and your mother describe young Ed?
I would say, I'll start with my father. He, growing up in a real estate family, right? My dad, who started our business in the late '60s, and really was the driving force behind, the early years of Russo Development, and was the reason why, I got into the business to begin with. He, he would describe me, I think, as a hard worker because by his own admission, he it was hard work alone that led to his success. I mean, he was a D student in high school, never didn't go to college. Used to show me his report card, not as an example of like, hey, Ed, you should be studying harder. Like, you got to do better in school. It was to show it was to show me that like, hey, even with his lousy grades, like C's and D's in high school, he was able to be successful in life because he put his head down. And he wasn't a highly educated guy, but he worked hard, and that's where success comes from. So he always, was sort of complimentary that I had a good work ethic at a young age, and my mom too. I'd say my parents probably worried about me and my sister working too hard, not hard enough. Like we were a little bit obsessive in that way. Like once we got set our mind to something, even out working in the field in between semesters in school or as a young kid, like I always enjoyed work, and I always took a lot of pride out of my parents feeling like they built a good work ethic in us.
So you wanted to make him proud, it sounds like, obviously, which we all do. But you say work. Was there any sports? Like what got you into work ethic? Because like as a young person, something that we do usually creates that work ethic, even though if our parents say we have to, right? I mean, something gets us, inspired, engaged, excited. What was it for you?
It was money, John, to tell you the truth. And being a good negotiator, meaning my father negotiated with me as a kid, like he would pay me for every chore I did, clean the house, you know, he was my father was in the military police,
Okay.
and he would have these like mock military police inspections where he'd come into my room as a kid and be like, you got to make your bed a little bit neater and you got to polish your shoes and everything I did. I mean, this is 25, 30 years ago plus, this was worth $1, that was worth 50 cents. And to me, to be able to get paid for doing anything, raking leaves, keeping the house clean, it was like, oh my gosh, this is nothing's better than this. So I was very motivated by even, you know, amounts of money that to a kid, would have seemed like, a lot, but really in reality was trivial. I liked playing sports and I liked being part of a team, and I think I got, some work ethic from that, but it was all about like the taste of, the financial reward of working hard.
No, there's a book called Make Your Bed Every Morning. It was from a military person. I forget what, branch they were in, but
Uh-huh.
how like that, first of all, doing that sets your day, right? Sets like, I'm going to be organized. I have a task. I got to get it done. But when people put cash to it, that's a whole nother level. Like he didn't have that in this
Right,
book, but I
right.
love that. I love the fact that, and if you look over the years of how generations have changed, and everyone gets a trophy. Like your father instilled real discipline, and if you don't, do it or execute, you don't get what the reward. And I just think that's a great thing to be. So how's your mother fall into this? Because like my mother and father both had so much of an influence on why I am who I am. And they had it in such different ways. Yet the combined mix is, why we are who we are. How did your
Yeah.
mother play a role?
So, my mother and father grew up in the same hometown. They both came from Woodridge, New Jersey, went to the same high school, and in a lot of ways, coming from similar backgrounds, both Italian families, they were very, complementary match. But, you know, they were different in one important way. My mother is hard a worker as my dad was. He played hard. He worked hard and he played hard, right? And um, he was never bashful about saying, look, as long as you, um, you know, keep your head on straight and you're doing the right things in business and you're honorable and you're high character, you'll be successful. But have a good time, take plenty of time off, enjoy your friends, enjoy life. My mother, I think, was in a lot of ways, more disciplined than him. Like she was the disciplinarian in our house when we were younger, and even as getting older, she was always the one that was, be a little careful, don't be too aggressive, don't be too big of a risk taker. Where my father was like, the larger than life personality, the big risk taker, the work hard, play hard. She was a little bit more reserved and conservative and tried to, uh, keep the reins in, on me, especially when I was new to our family business. She always worried about, what could happen if you went, too hard, too fast, and especially, at a young age, we all make mistakes, right? And I certainly made plenty of them, and still do to this day, right? So she was the grounded voice of reason. My father was the, go go go. Um,
Well, and listen, you're probably, you know this. You're probably somewhere in the middle. If not, you use that voice in your head to be what you need to be, depending on what it is. And I had a similar. My mother was like this unbelievable powerhouse, just, and my father was that too, but he definitely was more mitigating of risk. So it was like actually the opposite. It's interesting. So you went to college, you went to Lafayette, right? And I know we already discussed that you went into the business. That was part of your, the intro. But you know, what made you do it? Because at the end of the day, you know, I sort of know why I did. I have my story on why I got into real estate. What made you make that choice knowing that, maybe it was something like, maybe I go out and do something a little different first? Like, what brought you
Yeah.
there?
But candidly, and it worked out for the best. But my father almost essentially forced me to.
Okay.
Short of like, dragging me into the office and saying no, like you're gonna come work for the family business, right? That's really where you belong. That's the best thing for you. Um, you know, I had a lot of friends at the time coming out of the business school in Lafayette. They were interviewing on Wall Street. They were getting finance jobs, and I wanted to do something different than real estate, hoping in my heart that at some point I would join my father and be part of his business, but didn't feel that it was going to be the most best way for me to learn, grow, and my friends were doing very different things at the time, and he was really convinced that in our little corner of the world, and this was in the late 90s, right? The real estate market was coming out of what wasn't a great period. He saw a lot of opportunity at the time, and he felt like, you really ought to be here. You're going to see more. You're going to learn more. Don't take a couple years and go out on your own. Like, I really want you to be with me now. And in hindsight, I sometimes wonder what it would have been like if I had that, more diverse experience than just, being born and bred and working through our company for my whole life. But he was right in the sense that at the time that, I joined our business, there was a lot of things happening. There was a lot of deal flow. There was an opportunity to do different types of development that we had done previously. That's the period of time that we got into the data center business, which,
Yep.
to this day is a big part of, what we, the types of projects that we build. And he just had in his, a feeling that there was going to be a couple year opportunity that he didn't want to see me miss. And he was right. We had a great run in that those first couple years I was with him. Those were a couple of the best years we've had.
Listen, he needed you, plain and simple, right? And I guess, when you come from a close knit family business, trust is everything. And obviously, he trusts you. I mean, like, that's because it's a big role to jump in at such a young age. Again, I tell you how I get to know my friends better by doing this podcast. Your senior thesis was on REITs. I mean, like,
Yeah.
so when you say, I guess your head was going there anyway, right? Because otherwise, you could have picked so many other things that may have interested you. So it's like
Yeah.
your conscious is saying one thing, but your subconscious, I think, always put you where you are. And thank God, because you've done such a tremendous job, and you are exactly where you should be. No, there was no need to do in my mind, because you should just bury that and move on from
Yeah,
that.
of course.
You
Of
know,
course. It worked out for the best,
yeah,
for sure.
totally. So, all right, you get in. You are 24. You have that work ethic. You're clamoring for the reward, but you didn't really have to risk much, right? Like, if you didn't make your bets, you didn't get a dollar, right? Here you are now, and like you said, lots of opportunity. You got to take a chance. What I found fascinating was, I guess, the first deal you worked on, no one agreed with you, and you could tell us a story where you had to invest your own money, whether it was saved or however you got it, into a deal to actually get everyone to say, okay. Now, tell us that story. Maybe that's not the exact story, but
Yeah, I can tell you two sort of deals that I vividly remember from the first,
that got you
first
kicked
year.
off, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of them actually, to my father's credit, was a deal that got done. Where it was already it was a site that we were buying that was under contract before I even graduated, like
Okay.
6 months before I was out of school. My father approached me and said, "Hey, I have an opportunity to go under contract," meaning him, right? I have an opportunity to go under contract for great infill industrial site, in our backyard, not far from our sort of home base. And he goes, "Look, I'm going to ask you, I got to put up $50,000 as a deposit under this contract." And at the time I was 22, 23 years old. I had worked through high school, through college. I didn't have 50 grand, but I had close to it because I had saved a lot of money. And
Yep.
my father had helped me a little bit when I was in school, and
Yep.
to mitigate some of my expenses. So he came to me and even though he had the ability to do this deal on his own, he said, listen, like, I want you to be the one to put some money at risk. And for me at the time, like coming out of school, it was a real amount of money, but he was doing it because he wanted to create an opportunity for me to, be a principal in this
Yeah.
project because he knew in his heart it was going to be a good one. And I think too, he wanted to teach me the lesson that, look, there's no like, reward without risk, right? And even though you're coming into a family business and there's already a good foundation here, like you're gonna risk something that's important to you, even if it's not a huge risk. It's you're gonna take some risk. So I ended up, putting up the money, and about 6 months after I got out of school, um, we were able to get this project through a land use process, and we had a closing, and we ended up making a deal with a tenant before we had to buy the site. So I was able to finance the acquisition of the land without having to go out of pocket, which for me, I was able to do this deal without even partnering with my father. Like I ended up owning 100% of this. It was like a 150,000 square foot warehouse, because my father set it up in a way where, you know, I had an opportunity to control a site for a small amount of money, and I had a window of opportunity working with him to get a tenant to commit to it. So that was one which I appreciated what my father did for me, you know, instantly, and knew that was, a really blessed way to come into the business. The second story I would tell you, and this relates to the comment I made about data centers. We got into the data center business by accident. We had a data center customer call us on a available sign on a warehouse that my father built in the 80s, and we had available space. It was a couple 100,000 feet. They saw vacant. It was in a market that they wanted to be in, and they said, "Look, you know, we want to lease your building. We're a technology company. We're going to make all this investment in the building. But in order to do it, we have to rip the roof off. We have to rip the slab out. We have to basically tear the building apart in order to retrofit it for our use." And, we're sitting there listening to this tenant tell us what they were going to do to the building. We said, "Look, we've never built a data center before, but like we have a vacant site down the street. We can build you a new building cheaper than tearing this existing building apart." And, kudos to this company. They took a flyer on us because, again, we didn't
You had no
we
idea. You were
didn't
like,
know what we
green.
were getting into, and they were patient with us. But we built brand new building for them, and it became a tremendous learning experience, and it gave us street credibility because once we went through this, soup to nuts data center build, this was right around the .com era. This was like 2000,
Yep.
2001. There was a wave of these requirements around, and we were able to grab a bunch of others because like we were one of the few Jersey developers that had actually, built one.
Yep.
And that was, a great springboard for us. So that was also in the first year I was in the business.
Well, and then look at that. If you just look at, first of all, your father's a genius. I mean, the fact that he understood what skin in the game would mean, and knowing that he brought you in, but unless you feel what it feels like to have risk and to have something on the line and not to know it's just sort of safe for you to go about your everyday business, he gave you the earliest, quickest lesson you could possibly do. So kudos to him.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I think is interesting, that and why I like to hear the early stories, is if you look at Russo today, they're a gigantic data center developer, huge residential developer, and industrial owner, right? Like, but like no one realizes you know, the story of like how it was happenstance almost that like you became what you became, and that why people should just learn that, wake up, execute, and not be afraid to learn something new. Like the data center thing could have been easier to say, nah, I don't want to change this building, too much noise, and not recommending and trying to do something that you really did not know how to do and you weren't afraid. So that's a big deal.
No, of course. I mean, look, hard work and luck. Like we were very lucky to,
And not being afraid. Cause like,
yeah, and to be a little bit of a risk taker.
yeah,
Um, I've become more of a risk taker as I've gotten older, and I felt a little bit more comfortable that things have a tendency of working out. But early on in the business, I wasn't. My father was the opposite. I mean, he risked a lot. He started out not having a college education, coming from a very middle class to lower middle class family. Started out as a real estate broker, did that for 5 or 6 years, and got into the development business. On every deal he had to make, you were basically risking everything you had because you couldn't, he couldn't borrow money at the time. He didn't have,
Yeah.
a start, and that being a little bit more open to risk, not cavalier, not taking risks without prudence, but he used the risk to
Well, I'm
that's
going to
where I
agree to disagree. You put in all the money you had at a 24-year-old, whether you like it or not
yeah.
knowing what was going to happen to it. So he taught you that, and you did it early. So you're a very humble person. So, but you did more than you.
Well, I'll tell you, not to sidetrack, but I'll tell you a related story to that. I guess in the back of my mind, I was hoping that if this deal that I was putting, all this money into, if it didn't work out, I was kind of hoping that my father would bail me out. And I'll tell you why. I mean, I couldn't have been more than 10 years old. My father used to love to gamble, right? Had a bunch of friends that, he was a big, used to travel around the country, going to trap shooting competitions, right? Like clay
Yep,
target.
yep,
They would shoot targets during the day, and then they'd go out and they'd gamble at night. They'd play poker, right? Fun-loving group of guys. So at a young age, he'd be teaching me, like, he always wanted to play poker, and we'd pay cards and we'd play cards for money. And I can remember one time, losing to him, and I was very upset because I lost, whatever it was, $25, $50.
right.
My money from, doing all his military police drills,
Yep,
right?
yep,
Clean the house. Here's a buck. Here's 50 cents. I risked it on the line playing poker with my dad at 10 years old. And, you know, after I lost, and I was upset, he gave the money back to me. And he said to me, he goes, Eddie, I want you to know that, I'm giving the money back to you because I know if, the tables were turned and you lost to me, and I lost to you, you would do the same for me. And he says to this, he used to tell the story fondly. He used to say, and your reaction to that, meaning mine, was I was crying from losing my money when he said, like, I know you'd give the money back to me if the tables returned. I started crying even more, which told him I wasn't going to give him money back. So
yeah. Because then he put you into that you could never lose again, right?
that's right.
Yep,
I was like, whatever he lost to me, I was keeping.
yep.
So you know that's just
That's funny.
that always stayed with me when we came to taking risks in the future.
Totally. Now, listen, you're in it together, which is good. But he taught you some great lessons, and because that's what he learned. He learned himself. All right. So the data center thing happened. Obviously, you took it to a certain level. You know, the family started out as industrial, so you learned that, and you understood that you have great holdings there. So, what makes you pivot into residential? And why is that the product that, in my mind, you put most of your headspace into? Obviously, you're doing a lot of things, but
Yeah,
what created that? Uh, and you know, let's start off with that. That's my
yeah.
first question.
I would say it was probably three things that were really, um, you know, factors in us saying this. This goes back, probably 10, 12 years ago now, where we said, look, we should really try to, get into the residential apartment business. And I would say one of the things was, we very much wanted to stay local in, not just New Jersey. We've done a few projects in New York and
Yeah,
Pennsylvania, but for the most part, most of our developments are in the northern half of Jersey, and we really wanted to stay in that market, and we didn't feel like we'd have that many we didn't feel like we'd have as many opportunities in the future if we were only building industrial buildings or trying to do these data centers, which we had done maybe 5 or 6 by the time
yeah,
we got into the residential business. So we said, look, if we want to stay in this market, but we want to grow and we want to do more, we should think about doing a different type of development. And, apartments at the time were, the market was strong, it was growing. We felt that was a logical choice. The second thing that got us very excited about building apartments was, my father, to his credit, and I tried to, live by this as well. Like we always tried to build a better building. We built a lot of warehouses that arguably, maybe we spent too much on how they looked and the design and landscaping because we wanted to build buildings that look nice. And from an economic point of view, you don't always get paid a premium if you build a well thought out, really nice looking warehouse, right? Sometimes you do, but sometimes your warehouse tenant, right? They're looking for just storage space. They don't care if their building's pretty or not.
I started as an industrial broker, so I remember when I was younger, like your buildings were known as like not overbuilt, but like way higher caliber of an industrial building than anyone else around you was. So I remember that.
And look, my father deserves the credit for that. He built, that was his, he built our reputation in that regard. But we got frustrated in a sense that we're like, we're spending this extra money on these buildings and we're not necessarily getting extra value. Whereas in the residential business, especially on some of these mixed use communities, we've had an opportunity to work on, right? Apartments, retail, office. If you put more time and money and investment into a quality project, it directly relates to what you can get in rent. It becomes more exciting. It's more fun to build nicer projects than it is to build just
Right.
plain vanilla stuff. So that was the second thing that attracted us to the residential business. We felt like creativity and quality design and construction would be rewarded more than we were used to in the industrial business.
And I get it, and it makes complete sense. And obviously, we're involved with you, and we see that, right? Because like we're more in office, now life sciences and more commercial projects. And you're right, like Class A plus, you will get the rents, right? Like that is a product that you'll get. Where industrial, what you're saying makes sense, right? Because it's an industrial building, and really they care more about the inside than the outside. But I think over the years that's changed too a bit, right? You just were ahead of time. But like I know development's development, but it's design's not. Like it's a whole different business. It may be a whole different set of people's brains that you have to now corral. And as you grew the company, what were the challenges of, like, just because you want to change now, everyone at your company, how do you get people's brains to feel the ability to want to, move in your direction and follow the vision and not be afraid that, oh God, now I'm in a product that like I don't even, maybe I don't add value. How do you
Yeah,
create that as a company?
no, it's a good question. I'd say when I came into the business, we were a small group, 8, 10, 12 people. Now my father had a great core group of professionals that have been with him for a while, but it was a small team. You know, Today we're well over 200 employees, and our growth to that over the last 20 or 25 years was to try to find really creative, really strong, experienced staff in areas where we were weak, meaning we didn't have the experience, or the existing staff that we had, had a different background than the types of people that we were recruiting. And over time, we were able to, not just grow our company, but grow it in a way where we really diversified the skill sets of our team and brought in a number of people across, a lot of disciplines, not just architecture and engineering, but construction, legal, marketing, that really helped us round out, the type of team that you would need if you wanted to build projects at a bigger scale and, nicer and frankly more management intensive projects. We were spoiled being in the industrial business for 30 years,
Yeah,
right? It's easy
totally.
to manage industrial buildings, especially, a lot of our buildings, they're single tenant, they're net leased. Getting into the residential business, or I know you guys have been in the office business for so long, know this too. Like it's when you're managing multi-tenanted office, retail, residential, it's a very different,
It's a heavier lift.
it's a much heavier lift, and you need a team that buys into that customer service, hospitality oriented type,
Yep.
you know, level of deliverable to your tenants. And we had people that were either came from that field in other companies or were excited by the prospect of working on these sexier projects, and we built out a good team.
And it was great because, for years, Jersey, there was no apartment development. It was almost like, outlawed to a certain extent as far as like being able to get anything zoned for that. And then, we're obviously there's just a housing shortage all over the country, but so okay, you get into it, you built your team, everyone has to buy in because it is harder. It's just more, it's just so much detail, from the cabinets to is it the right design, right?
Yeah.
But what I found interesting about what you did, like, I guess your first project in Kearney, or
Our first residential project was, was actually in Lyndhurst, not far from Kearney.
okay,
Some of the we built in Kearney maybe 2, 3 years years
But you
after.
went
But
in towns that really weren't used to these types of projects, or am I wrong? I mean, there wasn't a lot of apartment development anyway, and you're building these brand new, beautiful projects that are now called Vermella. I don't know if that was also at the very beginning or that became after, but what made you pick where you were building
yeah,
and
I mean,
why?
I would say that a couple of those earlier projects, the ones you mentioned, Lyndhurst, Kearney, very close to our home base,
Okay,
very close to the
so it
communities
felt
where,
comfortable.
yeah, we were doing other types of development in those communities.
Okay,
We felt like this is a logical place for us to start. They were underserved by new housing. They weren't getting as much attention as some of the, you know, um, more affluent markets on the waterfront or other suburban communities. And we felt like, if we build a quality product, but at a competitive price point, and we're in, more, middle class communities, like we can develop a little bit of a niche where we're building a nice building, but we're not pricing beyond what the community could bear. And that became our niche in the early years that we were building apartments. And you know, not just in in those two towns, but we built in the Oranges, we built in Harrison, we built in Union. These are all good communities, but communities where that are price sensitive. Um, we learned how to build successful projects and projects that underwrote in those price sensitive areas as time went on, and we started building in a lot of other communities, some of which were more affluent, where we could charge higher rents. Like we felt like our foundation of building in markets where you had to really watch your finances closely, otherwise deals wouldn't pencil, prepared us well for building in arguably easier markets to make the numbers work.
but plus, I think you added so much to these communities. I mean, and people know you for that, which I think is tremendous. Like we always want to like leave a community better than what we found it, or add some impact somehow. So what's your feeling on impact in creating that? Because having a brand now that everyone seems to know, was that the big idea? Were these Vermella projects at the beginning, or how did that evolve into where you are today?
So our Vermella brand was something that we started, right around the time that we were building our first apartment community. So we wanted to have something that we could build off of in the future and create a brand. And the impetus behind that brand to begin with was, you know, quality housing, but at a competitive
I
price,
love
right?
that. Yeah.
And um, what I would say in some of these towns where we built early on, you know, um, the towns really took a chance on us because even though we had a reputation as a developer in these markets, like we had never built housing before, and we had some towns to their credit who, worked with us, gave us approvals. Some of these projects were in redevelopment areas where we had to become the designated redeveloper in order to build, even if we were the property owner. That wasn't going to do it. The towns had to say, listen, we trust that you have the capability to build it. So we took a lot of pride in the fact that we had communities that were trusting us, and we were building a product that was probably different and to a higher level of quality than what had been built in those communities to date. So it was really a very mutually beneficial relationship. And we've tried to, you know, replicate that to this day in other communities where, we've been, maybe a little pioneering. Like Orange is a good example. We have a couple projects that we're building in Orange, which, at the time we started there 4 or 5 years ago, very little new market rate housing was being built. Today, between Orange, the East Orange, South Orange, this part of the state is seeing a lot of development, but we were a little bit pioneering at the time, and we did it because we felt like, hey, this is a community we can really make a positive impact in, and if we can make the numbers work on development, these are the types of areas we want to be in.
Well, you spurred that for real for lots of people because it's like the 4 minute mile until someone ran at 350. Like no one could break it. Like the mindset stays where the mindset was. And I just think that, we are what we think and what we can envision. But then you got to actually have the stress of doing it and taking it back to that word, or just, not everyone really understands how hard it is of what you do. What are some of the things where on these projects, or a story that you got through that like changed your mindset moving forward on maybe doing something bigger than you thought? Like, what was the biggest impact you had on maybe something went wrong? Because every deal there's things that go wrong, but or you didn't think you're going to be able to get through it.
Yeah.
What was one of those or two moments that you've had with that?
Yeah, I would say one immediately comes to mind. We had an opportunity to buy a site in Union Township from Merck. This goes back 7, 8 years ago now. And I know it's in an area you know well. You guys
Yep.
have been tremendously successful on another Merck property, around the corner from us in Kenilworth. At the time we were under contract to acquire that site, it was one of the biggest sites that we had acquired up to that point, and had a lot of moving parts, a lot of environmental issues. We were building a master plan community. It was going to be 1,300 units, whereas up to that point, most of the projects we were building on the residential side were 2, 3, 400
Yeah. So
units.
this is gigantic jump.
It was much bigger than
Yeah.
we had done before, and even though it was being built in phases, we were apprehensive about it because we knew that once we bought this site, not only were we invested in what it cost to buy the land, but we were on the hook for lots of remediation, lots of infrastructure, and it was at a bigger scale than we had done up to that point. And we had a little bit of a dispute with our neighbor, Kane University, which is been a hallmark in that part of Union County for forever, right?
Yep.
16,000 student state school. They were the dominant landowner in this area, and we were the new kids on the block, and we were fighting essentially for the rights to buy the site. And even though we had it under contract, they were claiming that they had legacy rights that ran with the land, where they had the ability to purchase it, not us. So the reason why I mentioned that story is we were nervous about buying this site. For a lot of different reasons, because we were fighting with the 800-pound gorilla
Yep.
to get it right. We were the underdog in that fight, clearly, and it was a big, complicated site. And after we bought it, it couldn't have worked out better than it did. I mean, it was the right time in the market. The township treated us very fairly. It became a successful project. And looking back, it taught us that we came within an inch of not proceeding. Like even though we had spent a lot of time and money pre-closing, like we were,
Out of fear, right?
yeah, we were thinking maybe this is just stretching too far. And thank God we didn't, because in hindsight, it worked out great. And coming off of that project, our appetite and our comfort to do bigger, more complicated deals changed forever. That was the turning point for us, where we said, hey, if we could do this one, with all the obstacles we had to overcome, we should be going
And
bigger.
that's the lesson I want everybody to hear, because even though you've been doing it for years and so many other things, from not knowing how to do a data center, like that as you bust through the next level of anything in your life, it could be personal, it could be business. It's usually that one fear moment that either you bust through or you don't. My question, like, what was the moment that said yes? Like, was there a mentor in your life? Was it your like how did you actually do it and like bust through?
Yeah, I can remember, it was probably a week before our diligence expired on our contract. I was sitting in my office, right where I'm sitting now, with my father's longtime general counsel, attorney by the name of Richard Berger, who retired, probably 7, 8 years ago. He was here. Our current general counsel, Chris Minks, my brother-in-law, Mike Pembroke, who's principal of our company, and really, um, driving force too behind what our company does day in and day
He's
out.
amazing.
With the four of us sitting there going, like taking the big gulp, going, okay, let's weigh the risks, the pros and cons of proceeding here. Do we feel like we've got this thing characterized well enough that we should take the plunge in? And most attorneys are always in that situation. They're going to be conservative, and they're
Yeah,
going to focus on the what can happen,
of course.
regarded.
Yeah.
And to our counsel's credit, and Rich and Chris were both you know giving us similar advice. They viewed it as a turning point. They said, you know what, we know the way you are, we know where you want to take this company. This is a moment in time for you to decide you're gonna go for it. We've done the best we could to educate ourselves. Like, let's do it. And if it wasn't for them saying, you know, this is something we think that we should do as a company, we wouldn't have done it. Having that reassurance was a big factor for us.
And that's why, like, I tell everyone, like, who you surround yourself with in business matters, because they obviously had faith in you, but even you need a tap on the back, a reassurance from someone, even after all the time that you've done it, right? So surrounding yourself with people that believe in you, right? That belief, and they believe in you, and they still do, and they're all amazing. You as a team, your whole company, doing unbelievable things. So I love that. And would you say this Berg, like, is he a mentor? Like, and who would you say is one of your one or two biggest mentors? Doesn't have to be within the company. That, like, because I had some that, like, when I was really young, like, they showed up and they changed my mindset drastically, right? And then as I went along, different ones would come along, and was so much I felt so much that mentors meant so much that I was constantly always, like, looking for them.
Yeah.
How do you feel
Yeah.
about that?
Besides, the, the, my inner circle, my dad and
Yeah,
counsel, like I would say, had a number of people outside of our family or our company that were very influential on me, and I would think Mike would probably say the same thing. Early on, I'll give you one example. My uncle, who's even though he was in our family, he had a little different perspective on our family business than my father, even though they were brothers. My uncle had a good glimpse into, what my father went through, sort of behind the scenes, and you know, when in the early years of our company, and he saw what very few other people saw, because he would see my dad in a different light and a different time than office hours, interacting with other people. Like he saw um, the strain and the stress that when you want to grow and you want to do things and you want to take risks, like what that can have on you. And I would say my dad, lived, is still alive today, thank God, has lived a blessed life, but always struggled with managing stress and managing hypertension, and had a stroke at a relatively young age, 71 years old. And he was he's a very healthy person, never smoked, never drank, like was very into um, a healthy lifestyle. But because he was a go 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 guy, he always was under that heightened
stress.
level of stress and tension. And my uncle, one of the early advice they gave me, he goes, look, you know it's great to be ambitious and have a lot of goals and want to raise the bar in anything you're doing, right? But make sure that you manage, the mental side and the physical side of what you're doing, because he saw the effects that even a successful business, right? We didn't have a
Yep.
lot to worry about, but there's stress in every company. you know, Between what my uncle told me and what I heard from a lot of other executives in other industries over the years, that's one of the single biggest things that we learned. No matter what business you're in, real estate or otherwise, you have to have a healthy lifestyle, and you have to know how to manage the bumps in the road that come at you, because no business is worth killing yourself for, right? And managing stress is,
And it's also how you look at it, right? As you get, I actually, everything that's happened that I thought was bad ended up being good. It didn't feel good while I was feeling it. I didn't know why it was happening to me. And as when younger, I was worse. But it almost opened up either something else, or thank God we didn't, or I didn't do that, both personal and for business. And I think that's a mindset, but it does have to attach to how long you allow that bad feeling to happen, right? That, in managing your stress, and knowing that if you always know that, like, it's happening for a reason. And and you're old enough to now know, like, how many times did you think it was bad that it ended up being good? Most of the time.
so many times. I can't tell you how many deals we lost out on. Sick. We were sick. Oh my gosh. We spent so much time. We got beat out. And as you get older and you get more experience, you realize there's always another opportunity. There's always another transaction, right? You got to look forward, not back. And so many of the transactions that we were sick over losing out on, in hindsight, it was a good thing we did. Not because maybe somebody else didn't make them success, you know,
No, it opened up whatever was next
another opportunity presented itself,
that
or
you wouldn't
maybe
have
we were
time.
too far had we gotten that,
Yeah,
maybe it was a little beyond our comfort zone. So, what you said, John, everything's happened for a reason. I'm a person of faith. I really believe that we live a blessed life, and I don't question why things happen anymore. I did a lot in my younger years.
me too.
Now,
Good.
I am of the mindset everything happens for a reason, and you got to live your life that way.
You know what? I think it makes it more fun. And listen, not to say that you have to you want to feel it but get through it fast, right? Like just like fail fast, you want to feel crappy and get through that just as fast and know what's next. And otherwise, you won't have your creativity. So to de-stress, it seems like you're like a huge fisherman, right? Like I fished a couple of times, but that seems like more stress, like sitting there all day waiting for something to come and not really having anything to do it. Now, I'm sure there's an art in fishing, but what made that a big focus for you? Because you're not doing it, you know, in pastime. You're actually,
Yeah, no,
a real focused fisherman.
yeah, I love to fish. There's no question about that. And I would say I got into it heavy 10, 12 years ago. And to me, I just wanted to be on the water, right? Anything on the water, which fishing is certainly a big part of where we spend
Totally.
time in the water. But my kids are at an age now where whether it's scuba diving, whether it's diving, whether it's, you know, we like to surf, even though I'm a lousy surfer. My kids, my nephews, my nieces are much better than me. But you know, anything you can do in as a family in the water, traveling to different parts of the world. So many cool. We've gotten to visit so many different places all over. Pacific, Atlantic, different parts of Europe. Like to me, to be able to get away and be on the water, whether it's fishing or doing other hobbies, so relaxing, right? That time away from business or whatever the stresses of being at home are, right? Personal or business related. Everybody needs an escape. And when you're out, you're 100 miles off the coast of wherever you are, which is normally when we're fishing. Like you're not, you're in these remote places. Like you're out in the middle of nowhere. Like I never feel more at peace than at those times. And the fact that my family's into it too, not just my immediate family, my extended family. We have built a great friend network all over the world.
That's so good.
Go to these fishing tournaments and Mexico, and you run into people from home and or from other parts of the country. It's a great network, and
I'm
I
happy for you because like you're gonna watch this back and you're gonna see you have tremendous energy, right? Like you have great aura, great presence. And when you talk about real estate and all the stuff that you're doing, you're measured. The minute you talk fishing, it's like a different person jumps onto the screen,
yeah.
which I could just see that in a good way, in a positive way, that like you really love this, and it's good that someone could find something that offsets
Yeah.
the other part of life and you have and being the water's amazing, right? I mean, being on the water and
It's
you know,
we've been on the water a few days. We probably wish we weren't in crappy
well, I'm
weather.
sure you've had to, yeah.
It's just um, I can't tell you how many people, non-water people, non-fisher, people haven't fished a lot. We take them and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible." We see why you enjoy it. It's not just about catching fish. It's more about the experience and the peace of being away. And not to, no pun intended, but we got hooked on fishing at a young age, and
So good.
and to see my family, my kids be into it, just made it even better.
Yeah, it's like golf. I mean, it's the most frustrating thing that you could possibly do, but you're with people, you're outside, you're in nature. When I was young, my father had a boat called Mr. Booze with one of my uncles, who was I felt he was like a second father. So there wasn't much fishing on that boat. But we had such a good time going to, kicking into restaurants and docking, and the whole thing was tremendous.
I love it.
So I know you're busy. I wanted to ask one more question. So knowing that we love our industry and we want to add and have impact and add value, and we're trying to, what would you, and we want more younger people to come into this business. Like, what advice would you give someone now with all the change going on in real estate with technology? And, if you look at e-commerce and from warehouses And I felt over the last 15 years, correct me if I'm wrong, we were able to experience a sea change in what real estate became, right? Like when you wanted something delivered to your house in 24 hours, it needed warehouses. Hotels changed on what they were. Office buildings became more like hotels, and data centers started cropping up because of the web and because of the cloud. So, how would you excite a young person to come into the real estate business, and what advice would you give them?
So I would say in two different scenarios, if trying to bring somebody into an established company like ours, like when we're out and we're making our recruiting pitch to, you know, finance or engineering or construction, graduates coming out of, the schools in our area, Rutgers, NGIT, Stevens, right? We're all places where we're, actively recruiting. Our pitch to them wanting to join an established business is, here's the opportunity that lies ahead. Here's all the different things that are changing in our business. Like I believe right now, the next 10 years, at least in our little corner of the world in New Jersey, I think there's more opportunity for real estate companies than there was in the 10 years prior to this, or the 10 years prior to that. Like there were different opportunities
And
for
why do
small,
you feel that?
because there's growth everywhere now. Even though there's, right at this moment, there's a lot of turmoil in the
Right.
market, trade wars, a lot of socioeconomic things happening around the country. You know, Putting that aside, if you look at the next number of years, you're seeing growth in a lot of different areas, right? The data center market, because of AI and other initiatives, a lot of potential. You mentioned before the housing shortage in our country, a lot of potential there. The warehouse market, the office market, people coming back to work, feels like there's more opportunity there. So, our pitch to, young people that we're trying to attract to our industry and to our company in particular is, real estate's a good place to be now. Development in New Jersey is a good place to be. Look at all these opportunities that are ahead of us that, in the past, maybe the residential market was good, but other markets weren't. Like, there's a lot of positive things that we're seeing across a number of different property types. The pitch that I would make to a lot of young people that want to get into business and are entrepreneurial and want to do it on their own, which you know, um, I've had, a number of people I've bumped into who, other, people going into another family business,
Yeah.
or people that are coming out of another industry, maybe they just sold their business and they want to get into real estate. The advice that I give them is, start with a very narrow goal and a very specific thing that you want to accomplish, right? The real estate industry, it's too broad of a spectrum, right? You can be a developer, you can be an investor, you can be a value add person. There's a million different property types. Like you've got to, you can't do it all. You have to pick something you want to be an expert at. Spend a couple years at least really honing your skills in that area, and then grow from there, right? One project at a time, one part of the market at a time,
Or one skill at a time, even.
one skill at a time, right? And I've seen, like, 15 years ago, I used to say to myself, like, God, I could never, like, what my father did in the late 60s, like, to start a business, a lot easier to do it than today, right? So much competition, you need so much capital,
Yeah.
is all plausible. But I tell you, some of the young people that I've interacted with over the last 10 or 15 years who have actually gone out and done it and built a business from scratch, which, no matter how successful our company is, I can never say, like, yeah, like, I started this from scratch. Like, I came into a business that had a great foundation. I've seen others in a competitive market start and be successful, and that's made me go, you know what? There is still a lot of opportunity in this business for anybody, whether you're starting from scratch, whether you're coming to an established company. It's an exciting time, right? Notwithstanding all the noise you hear every day, I don't know. I think there's a lot of
And
opportunity.
it's so interesting because whenever people ask me, like, I'm like, you could buy one, two single family house and rent it out and do a contract and have the maintenance and do your accounting. Like, real estate lets you start something very
Small, yeah.
small. I had another guest on who started with one house, ended up with 90, sold those, and now owns, 8,000 apartments because he was able to do that one house. But I also was taught a lesson when you said, and I love that you said that, like, one skill, one thing, like, get confidence, be something to someone, like be value add to something to someone. David Mandelbaum, who is a big Jersey owner, when he was nice enough to let me come into his office when I was going to be a broker, and he put a dot on a piece of paper, and he said, "Don't leave that dot till you know everything in that dot.
Yeah.
Like know something, be a value add to someone. Don't think about you need to own all the other dreams and hopes will come when you actually are a value add to someone, to something, to somehow."
John, I'm sure you took a lot away and learned a lot from that discussion. And I got to tell you, working with you and John Saraceno over the last, gosh, 8 to 10 years now, and have an opportunity to not only become friends and get to know one another personally, but work on half a dozen exciting
Yep.
projects together. We've learned a lot from you. We've enjoyed the experience, and we've been blessed with great partners, and the opportunity to build exciting projects. Like that's what gets our juices flowing. And I got to tell you, we have a lot of admiration and respect for the Onyx crew and how you guys do what you do day to day, and still have time to do things like this podcast. And how many times have we seen you speaking at different philanthropic, non-business related events. It's um, you know
Well,
it's
well,
you know we,
thank
we
you.
feel, yeah, we feel great to be friends with you
Plus,
guys.
I'm fortunate. I have a great partner. Like he's a brother. Uh, you know, I'm very fortunate. And I appreciate, we appreciate you as much, if not, if not more. Uh, I always say, and my father taught me, like a good deal with a bad person is always a bad deal, but a good deal with a great person is just a overwhelmingly, personally good thing as well as a business thing. So
Yeah.
that's how I feel.
No, you guys taught us that. Like you're probably our first partners, first or second, but early on, and I meant what I said. We learned a lot from you, and we're looking forward to the future.
Well, we appreciate it. And thank you for being on. This is fun. People are going to love this. So, again, we appreciate you being a guest.
Thank you, John. Really, really enjoyed it too.
All right.